want to introduce Ed Londergan, who started reading as a youngster and switched from reading to writing, although he does have a long list of his favorite authors that include Stephen King, Robert B. Parker, Margaret Atwood, Harper Lee, David Baldacci, John Sanford, and Kenneth Roberts. That's probably
to name a few.
To name a few. He turned to writing full-time just a few years ago, but basically he's been writing his entire life as an adult. So thank you for coming. This is a great story, Bathsheba Spooner.
Afternoon, everyone.
Yay.
I'm going to make it quick because my parking thing expires in about 30 minutes. But anyway, yeah, Bathsheba Spooner. Has everybody heard of Bathsheba Spooner?
No.
No? Okay, all right. The case of Bathsheba Spooner is filled with unanswered questions. Now, she's one of my favorite humans. She's been dead 244 years, but that doesn't really matter. But all of the questions that are just outstanding, they have fascinated people and kept their interest for 244 years, actually. Probably longer because there were a lot of questions before she died. Her father was Timothy Ruggles, who was a man of some substance. He was a brigadier general in the French and Indian War. He was a state representative to the Massachusetts House of Representatives. He was president of the Stamp Act Congress. He was the Chief Justice of the Court of Common Pleas. He was the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And for his service in the French and Indian War, he was made surveyor of the King's Forests, which got him 1,500 acres of land in Princeton and 300 pounds a year. John Adams, I found this in my research. John Adams wrote this of Timothy Ruggles in 1762. Ruggles' grandeur consists in the quickness of his apprehension, steadiness of attention, the boldness and strength of his thoughts and expressions, his strict honor, conscious superiority, and contempt of meanness. People approach him with dread and terror. Sounds like a fun guy at a cocktail party, huh? So that was her father. Other things I read, he was a tall, broad-shouldered man. He's the only one of the entire family for which there's an image. He looks like a real stern guy, but he was a vegetarian in those days. He was vegetarian, and he only drank small beer, which was beer, second batch of beer made with the same ingredients. So he was a guy to be reckoned with, and he was a British loyalist. At that time, you may well know, everybody considered themselves an Englishman. And he was one stood out. His wife, Bathsheba Spooner Ruggles, from the Cape. Her family founded the town of Sandwich. She was married to William Newcomb, who owned a tavern and a couple other businesses. He was very successful, and he died. They had 7 kids. This woman bore 14 children in her life. 7 to Newcomb, 7 to Ruggles. She was 7 years older than Ruggles when they married, and Ruggles was her husband's attorney. And they married 5 months after the husband died, which I guess wasn't uncommon in those days. But yeah, she was somebody of substance also. And he hooked up with her. I don't know whether he married the money or what, but based upon their later life, it didn't seem like it was a marriage of love. I can't show you some of these things, but he ended up taking the family along with other Ruggles-related families and got a grant of land in Hardwick in that area. Supposedly it was 64,000 acres, which is 10 square miles, which, if you look at him, yeah, that's about right. You could. And it's the house was on top of this hill. You can see it from miles. This big rounded hill. And in the middle of one of the fields is this boulder. And the thing's probably 6 feet high by 12 feet long by 10 feet wide. And it was it had to be dragged, right? It wasn't a glacial erratic. And there's a hole in the top about yay big and about yay deep, and there's a weep hole on the side. And what he did was he got himself a 100-foot pine tree or whatever, had it shaped, put it through a hole, and put a huge Union Jack up. And if you could see the hill for miles in any direction, just imagine what it looked like with a 100-foot flagpole and a gigantic flag up there. So he was very proud of that. Along the road, this is Upper Church Street in Hardwick, if you ever feel like taking a ride. Along the sides of the road are huge stone walls. Now, I like to look at that. I don't know whether he actually had them built or not, but you kind of get the measure of the man by where he lived. And these are the biggest stone walls I've ever seen. And they're probably 6 feet wide, 4 feet high, and they run for, I don't know, half a mile, on either side. Big, but it's a beautiful, beautiful sight up there on the hill. And yeah, the barn foundation is still there. If this is the field here, and the rock's over here, the barn is right over here. But what's weird about the barn is one side, the foundation wall, goes here, and the other one goes beyond it. It's like 12 feet longer than the other one, and I can't quite figure out why that would be. Because it doesn't look like anything was up here and they took it apart. So anyway, that's another question of why did that happen. But yeah, the barn doesn't look big enough for what Ruggles supposedly had. He lived like a baron. He had a deer park that he stocked with deer. So when his associates came out, they'd go deer hunting. He had prize cattle. He had a huge orchard. He was a big orchardist. The man knew his stuff, almost like a Thomas Jefferson type. That same thing, that level of interest. But the barn doesn't seem big enough because he was supposedly also an excellent horseman and had a dozen horses. And the barn doesn't look big enough. And the folks in Hardwick went, yeah, we think that's it, but we're not sure. So, yeah, I don't know. Now, Bathsheba. There's no image of Bathsheba, no. However, I saw her in many places where there were comments about her beauty. She was supposedly beautiful. She had a superior attitude like her father. She was better than anyone. And imagine being raised in that type of environment, you probably would. She was very well educated. There was a school in Hardwick, an elementary school, and I don't know whether she went to it. I saw her mention a tutor, so they might have had a private tutor come out. But she was very, very well educated. There were a couple things that she wrote, petitions for her stay of execution. When you read them, you can tell it's an intelligent, articulate woman who wrote. And she was an excellent horsewoman also, an excellent horsewoman. Supposedly she could ride better than most men, and she didn't hesitate to show that. And while it's not stated, it seems in a lot of ways she was very much like her father. So the assumption has been made that she was a British loyalist also. Although there's nothing in writing saying that, because again, that's one of those things. There's no documentation about some of the most important things, the most important questions you have about Bathsheba. So we're all left wondering. One of the questions is she married this guy, Joshua Spooner. Now Joshua was we're not sure what he was. He was supposedly a wealthy merchant and farmer, but there's been things that I've seen that said he was a meek and mild type. That's why she didn't like him, because she was more forceful and he was this wimpy little guy. But I've also seen things where it said he was abusive, he was a drunkard, he was a philanderer, possibly with one of their servants, but he was also a church treasurer and he was a selectman. So you can't reconcile the two too often. His son is quoted as saying, calling him an old bogus, which I guess translates to an old fart these days. My dad's an old fart. And he wasn't the type of father I wanted, or something like that. So, you don't know. You see all of these different pieces of his story, and you don't know what to believe. But why she married Joshua Spooner, that's another. If Bathsheba was the daughter of such a wealthy and powerful man, why she marry this guy who was, yeah, wealthy, but he wasn't anything special. Why didn't she get a husband in Boston? I mean, her father was in Boston all the time. He knew all of these people. Why did she kind of marry this country merchant? It seemed below her station. And that's another question. This didn't seem to be a marriage of love either. Well, she killed him, you know, that's besides the point. But in the beginning, you can't quite figure why that is. His family was in Boston. And there have been conjectures made that they moved from Boston to Brookfield. But he's the only one I can find. Everybody else was still in Boston. And that he was a loyalist and he wanted to get out of Boston. Which, you know, you hear all this stuff, it doesn't necessarily make sense. But they were married on her birthday in 1766. In only 8 years, they had 4 children, one of whom died when he was 2 or 3 months old. The rest were 5. They had 3 servants, Sarah Stratton, her son Jesse Parker, and a guy, Alexander Cummings, who was a British soldier who was one of Burgoyne's men. He came in kind of late into the picture. And supposedly they had the most beautiful home in Brookfield. Now, this is a source of contention between me and a couple other historians, local historians. They had Bathsheba and her husband. They had 3 kids. Spooner had business people, associates stopping by all the time and staying overnight. Bathsheba had her sister from Worcester coming out. There were a lot of people in and out staying there. And one of the guys locally said, I went to the Register of Deeds and it was a 2-bedroom salt box. And it's like, Bob and I had a big disagreement about that. There are other salt boxes that were in existence at that time that are still there. And if it was the most beautiful house in Brookfield, it had to be more than this. So I think it was a pretty good size house. They had an east parlor and a west parlor. East parlor was dining room pretty much. West parlor was the parlor. But it seems like, again, she wouldn't just marry a farmer and go live in some basic farmhouse. She was from up here, and Spooner stuff was down here. I just don't quite get it. I know a lot of people don't. But if you want to read a really neat book, it's the First American Revolution by Ray Raphael, and it's about how the first real resistance against the British came in Worcester in 1774. That's where the people didn't allow the courts to open. There were 4,000 men that came from all over Worcester County and lined the main road up to the courthouse. And the British officials had to walk this gauntlet to open the court, and they blocked them and said, no, you have to sign a letter saying that you won't open this until we tell you you can. And they said, no, they signed a letter saying we'll open it tomorrow. That didn't work. This was really the first opposition to British rule, I guess, is what it came down to in Worcester. Now, the legislature was dissolved in 1770. And the governor, Gage, he appointed a council of 36 men to basically run the province, the state. One of which, the leading one, was Timothy Ruggles. 17 of them agreed to do this. Everybody else said no, thank you. And I mean, it wasn't just that simple. Some of the people, especially some of the ones up in the western part, the houses were burned. You know, a little incentive not to do this. They were tarred and feathered. You hear that phrase, tarred and feathered, but nobody really stopped to think about what that meant. You were covered with boiling oil, you know, and then feathers were thrown. Where the hell the feathers came from, I don't know. But yeah, you're covered in boiling oil, and that was the punishment. And a couple of these people had that happen, so they just decided, you know, never mind, I'm not going to do it. Paul Revere did an engraving. It's called A Warm Place in Hell. And it shows Timothy Ruggles leading the 17 counselors to hell, into the jaws of hell. And the devil is there saying, I've got a good joke. I've got a fine, I've got a oh, I've got you now a fine haul by Jove. And one of the demons up above has a pitchfork, and he's pointing it towards Ruggles, and it says, "March on, Tim." So anyway, when that happened, the people in Hardwick confiscated all his property. Oh, his brother, actually, Benjamin, was the captain of the militia. He's the one who came and took his brother's property. And they killed a bunch of his cattle, cut down his orchard. It was pretty impressive. So they drove him out of town. There's a bridge there in a place called Old Furs. It's on Route 32. And the bridge goes over the Ware River. The bridge was in the same location at that point. And Ruggles was trying to leave, and his brother, Benjamin, and his militia were on the other side, blocking him from leaving town. And Ruggles finally got across. Benjamin said, "Fine, let him go." And Ruggles said, "I'm coming back with men, and I'm going to fight you. I'm going to get back and throw me out of Harbor." And his brother supposedly told him, "Fine, you come back, but you won't get to the other side of the bridge alive." Now, these are brothers. That's how hard the feelings were. And the hatred for him just grew because he was the leading counselor. He agreed with everything British. And as the anti-British sentiment flared, so did the hatred for Timothy Ruggles. And he almost rebelled, seemed to rebel. He liked it. It sounds like he liked a good fight. And of course, in 1776, Ruggles went to Boston with all of the other lawyers. He hightailed it to Boston, and they stayed in Boston because they were just driven out of everywhere else in the state. In 1776, in March, Boston was evacuated because Henry Knox, as we all know, went to Ticonderoga and brought back 80 cannon. They put them up on Dorchester Heights, and at some point, some morning, Admiral Howe, went out and looked up and went, "Oh crap, okay, everybody pack up, we're leaving. You can't stay here." But instead of going to Nova Scotia with all of the other loyalists and the army, Ruggles went to Staten Island. Now, Staten Island was, and I found this out during my research, was a big British base during the entire war. Washington never tried to take it. It was just there. British held for the entire war. So Ruggles went there trying to put together a regiment, battalion, I don't know, whatever it was, of loyalists to go fight. Unfortunately, he was viewed as a colonial. Yeah, smart, yeah, you like the British. But by the British officers, you're still a colonial. You'll never be one of us type of thing. And he thought he was superior, and they thought they were superior to him. So, it just didn't quite work for him. But yeah, he was down in Staten Island. He never got his group together. What do we call it? Something association, Loyalist Association, which his idea was it would take revenge on people who were wrong together. Now, in February of 1777, the story gets a little juicier. There's a 16-year-old Continental soldier, Ezra Ross, who fought at Bunker Hill, New York, Trenton. The kid's 16, so he started fighting basically when he was 14 with his four brothers. During the winter, Washington encamped in Morristown, New Jersey. It was a horrible winter. Everybody got sick, flu, pneumonia, whatever it was. So he got paroled. Well, he was from Ipswich. So the kid was walking home from Morristown, New Jersey to Ipswich, Massachusetts in February of 1777. He was sick, and he was trying to walk the 300 miles. He got to Bathsheba's door, right outside her house, and supposedly collapsed. She brought him in, nursed him back to health, and sent him on his way. And figured that was it. She gave him some motherly care and affection. And at that point in her relationship with her husband, it seems like she wasn't needed. They had the servant taking care of the kids, so she was kind of drifting. Her husband seemed like he could care less about her, but she less about him. In August, Ezra returns. He's going with the militia to fight at Saratoga and Ticonderoga. So he stops for a day, visits her, and her husband. Spooner actually took a liking to the kid. And he was helping Spooner out when, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. So anyway, he goes and fights at the Battles of Saratoga, and he comes back, but before he left, this is just me, I think there had to be some tender moments between the two of them. Now she's 31, he's 16. Maybe she just needed some tender love and affection. But he's back in November 1777. Burgoyne surrendered in October. All 6,500 of his men. So the surrender deal was, okay, all of your men will march to Boston and they'll be put on ships and sent back to England. And when the Continental Congress heard this, they went, whoa, time out. Why are we going to pay to send these guys back so they can come back and fight us? We're not doing it. It would have taken 30 ships to send 6,500 men back or more. So you have all of these British soldiers just wandering around. No one wants to support them. Well, some people did, some ones. But they're just kind of wandering around. They had to build their own prison camps. The first one up in Rutland was built, by them in 1777. But it was so loose that they kind of came and went because none of the Continental soldiers wanted to spend their time taking care of these guys. But they were skilled tradesmen, carpenters, wheelwrights, blacksmiths, tinsmiths, you name it. So they found employment. And there was a lot of, I guess, theft and debauchery blamed on these soldiers. So they just wanted them to scatter. And some of them, most of them, actually stayed when the war was over. They didn't fight against the residents, the folks, which was kind of interesting. But I can't show you that. In January of 1778, Ezra is still there. He's been there since November, middle of November. Bathsheba is quoted as saying during the trial that I had an utter aversion to my husband. She couldn't stand him. And she's pregnant. In January, she realizes she's pregnant. Now, it doesn't seem like she would spend any time with her husband. And Ezra was the only other man there at the time. So it seems logical to assume that the baby was Ezra's. She tells Ezra, listen, this can all be yours. The only thing standing in the way is my husband. So if we get rid of him, we can live here. And the kid went, yeah, how's that going to happen? She said, well, you're going to murder him. Well, the kid didn't like that. She gave him some poison, and he and Spooner were heading up to Princeton for a business trip. He took the kid with him along. And she said, when you're gone, poison. And you come back to me, he won't. Well, while they're gone, 2 British soldiers show up. Now, the Alexander Cummings, who I mentioned, who was the British soldier who became a servant, he started there, about the same time that Ezra came back. And he was there, and these 2 British soldiers, James Buchanan, William Brooks, come passing by. Buchanan was a blacksmith, Brooks was a tinsmith, and he recognized them. Hey guys, come here. They end up going in, meeting Bathsheba. She just gives them food and wine, and they just have a wonderful time. They haven't been treated this well ever. And she's lovely. So they're there, and a few days later, Spooner comes walking in the door. And she was quoted as saying, I have never been so stumped in my life. She never expected him home. There's a whole big argument, who are these men? And she lies, saying, oh, they're Alexander's cousins, and this, that, and everything. So they end up leaving. And what's amazing is the fact that Brookfield is 17 miles from Worcester. These people walk that regularly. They would go in the morning and come back at night. These two soldiers, they went to Worcester to find work, and they worked for a little bit. Then they came back to Brookfield, and they ended up going to what's now Warren, was Western then, for some work. They did some blacksmithing work. And then they came back to her house. Spooner was gone again, so they stayed, and they had a wonderful time. Again, same type of thing, food, drink, just having a wild time. And then they go to Worcester. This is February 27th, 1778. So they go to Worcester. She follows them the day later. Goes to Walker's Tavern. They're there. Her sister lived up the road a little bit, a mile away. And she told everybody she was going to visit her sister. She went and spent most of the day with these two British soldiers. Then she goes up to her sister's house about midnight, comes back early in the morning, spends the next day with them too. They're drinking, having a wild time, carrying on. And then she tells Buchanan, remember to be at my house tomorrow night. She's overheard by Walker's servant saying, she gets home, she leaves and gets home, and guess who's there? EZRA. He came back to claim her as his own. He has a brace of dueling pistols, and he said, Spooner will die by these tonight. He was going to challenge him to a duel, which was the only legal way to actually kill someone in Massachusetts, kill a man. So he figured, all right, I'll challenge him to a duel, I'll shoot him, this will all be mine. Well, the kid didn't really think about, okay, first off, why would Spooner accept the challenge to duel with you, a 16-year-old kid who's been hanging around his house? That would look a little weird. Even if you were to shoot him, you really think that would go over? And he then told Bathsheba, I'll shoot him when he comes home from the tavern. Spooner spent every night up at the tavern, which was in the center of Brookfield. He lived about a quarter of a mile away, lived in Bathsheba. And the soldiers got back by that time, the British soldiers. And Buchanan said, are you crazy? Everybody will hear the shot. If you shoot him at night, when he comes home, everybody's going to hear it. So she gets Billy Brooks, who was not the brightest one on the tree. On the way over to America, actually Canada, Brooks stole something from another soldier, and he was being chased, so he jumped overboard. This is in the Atlantic Ocean to get away. He was fished out, the shirt, clothing was given back to the soldier, and Brooks was flogged. So you get something. Bathsheba gets him all worked up, and he says, I'll kill Spooner. I'll take care of it. No problem. His time is come. So they're all in the house, they're all waiting for Spooner to come home. And when he comes up the walk, Brooks was outside before that. Spooner comes up the walk, Brooks attacks him, has his stick, beats him, kicks him, punches him, whatever. And then he calls EZRA and Buchanan to come out. And what are we going to do? Well, it's February, everything's frozen, you can't bury him. I know, let's stick him down the well. So they stuffed him down the only well on the farm, which if this was the road and here's the house, the well is right here, right next to the road. And you can go see where the well is now. You can see the 3 granite steps leading up to the house. Then Bathsheba pays them with 400 pounds of her husband's money. She gives him his watch, his shoe buckles, his clothing. EZRA and Brooks were about the same size as Spooner, so they dressed in his clothing. And then they go to Worcester, and they go to a tavern. And they're sitting there, and Buchanan and Brooks drink at one tavern, Brown's Tavern. Brooks goes to Walker's Tavern, and somebody got suspicious because what are you, a British soldier, doing with those shoe buckles? Oh, by the way, they just happen to say JS on them. And who are you? William Brooks. Well, you're not JS. Buchanan had Spooner's watch. That's a big, beautiful watch. It said JS on it. So they were questioned. They confessed actually right away. Yeah, we did it. News of the murder had made it to Worcester, so they were arrested. They said, she made us do it. She said, I had nothing to do with it. They did it. She's arrested and brought in questioned with 2 of her servants, Sarah Stratton and her son, Jesse Parker. They were at Walker's Tavern, and Bathsheba basically breaks down at one point and says, it's my fault. I put them up with it. They did it. I paid them. They ended up going and doing everything that I said for them to do. It's my fault, not theirs. The indictment was handed down on April 21st. And the line that stuck with me is, not having God before their eyes, but at the instigation of the devil, they murdered Joshua Spooner. So that was April 21st. The trial was April 24th, 3 days later. In those days, the trial would run one day. So you didn't have continuances that go on for weeks. So this trial started at 8 a.m. on a Friday morning and went till midnight. And then the jury was called back the next day to render a verdict. Well, during the prosecuting attorney was Robert Treat Payne, signed on the Declaration of Independence, Attorney General for the state of Massachusetts. The defending attorney was Levi Lincoln, who was only 6 years into practicing law. He'd never tried a criminal case before. They kind of threw him in there and said, here you go. The Chief Justice was William Cushing, who was a big deal. He went on to the Supreme Court. One of the justices was Jedediah Foster. Jedediah Foster lived in West Brookfield on what's now Foster Hill, which is about 1.5 miles from where Bathsheba lived. They knew each other. Ruggles knew Foster. They were on opposite sides of things, but they would have known of each other. They were both attorneys. But Bathsheba lived here. She would have seen him, would have talked to him, conversed, whatever. Had some interaction. The other justices were James Sullivan, Nathan Peasley Sargent, and David Sewell, who were all good jurists. But the prosecution says, okay, we have the confession, we have the declaration that the three men gave saying this is how it happened. We have all the evidence of Spooner's effects being with these men. Pretty much what more do we need? They really didn't. Lincoln said, all right, wait a minute, the indictment may not be correct. How do we know that they actually did this? This is the first capital case after the Declaration of Independence. Keep in mind that, he was saying that to the jury, but, to make them realize that the rest of the colonies were watching. This was very important. A lot of legal fine points. He had no defense, Brookfield Buchanan. Just, they're gone. They're all His defense of EZRA was that the kid had all of these opportunities. He was with Spooner many, many times, alone. He had plenty of opportunity to murder Spooner. He never did. As a matter of fact, when Bathsheba put him up to it, he rode home. He borrowed Spooner's horse, and he rode back to Ipswich. He didn't want to do this. And he actually never murdered Spooner. He helped dispose of the body. And he said Bathsheba was not in her right mind. It's maybe true. Who would end up giving or conspiring with basically strangers to murder your husband? Who would, you come in, you spend a couple days, you say, hey, by the way, did you murder my husband? A little while. They had no escape plan. They had no idea where they were going to go. Why did she paint him with her husband's effects? That was obvious. She just wasn't in her right mind. As a matter of fact, at the house that night, which is another thing that boggles the mind, there were 11 people. 11 people in the house. Bathsheba, the three men, Sarah Stratton, her son Jesse, two of Spooner's associates from Springfield who were staying the night, and two of the three kids. Why would you commit a murder with that many people in the house? But anyway, so she was not in her right mind. That was the defense. Saturday morning early, Justice Cushing announced that you are hereby found guilty and sentenced to be hanged by the neck until your bodies are dead. This trial is concluded. Oh, that was it. So they were sentenced to death. Now, at that point, there wasn't I would say formal government, but it was in the period between the end of British rule in 1780 when the Massachusetts Constitution went into effect. It was a real government, I guess. So this was the Council of the State of Massachusetts then. A group of men 16 men who basically ran the state, the province. The deputy secretary was Joshua Spooner's stepbrother, John Avery Jr., who was an ardent patriot. He was one of the Loyal Nine, which was the core of the patriot movement. They're the ones who worked with Sam Adams and everyone else. But I mean, he was a fervent patriot. The council was the one who set the execution date. It was June 4th. There was a petition by the prisoners, all of them, for additional time to make sure they were ready to meet their God. I think that's how it was phrased. Ezra's parents wrote this heartfelt, emotional plea for their son. He fought for the cause. He's now 17 years old. He made a mistake. He was drawn in by that wicked woman. Since the first time that he met her, she drew him in. And she corrupted him, and it's not his fault. And they went, tossed him. Never even responded. So, in June, they were given an extension to the end of June. So in June, Bathsheba makes a petition to the council and says, I want a stay of execution. Fine, I'm guilty, you can hang me, but just not now, let me have the baby. So they had midwives come in, 12 midwives, and now she would be in her 5th month, I guess. Now, if you look at a pregnant woman who's 5 months along, she's standing there naked, you can kind of tell that she's pregnant. All 12 of them said, she's not pregnant. No. Now, in those days, one of the tests was that there had to be a quickening. They had to feel the baby move. Well, I guess they gave her a fairly extensive exam. And they said, no, she's not pregnant at all. And the minister, at the time, Thaddeus McCarty, wrote a letter, a petition to the council saying, listen, I know she's pregnant. I spent all this time, I know she's pregnant. They ignored his petition too. Never even. So she sends another petition to the council that she wrote herself, again, very articulate. And she said that the babe I carry is innocent of the fault of her that bears it. And all she was asking for was an extension, a stay of execution. And the council turned her down. Said no. So she ended up, they said, no, you're going to die. Even though there was a second examination by 3 men and 3 women. The 3 women were from the original group. One of the men was her brother-in-law, John Green, who was a prominent physician in Worcester County at that time. The 3 men said, yes, she's pregnant. The 3 women said, no. So, on July 2nd, Reverend McCarty gives a sermon, The Guilt of Innocent Blood Put Away. A sermon preached in Worcester, July 2nd, 1778, on the occasion of the execution of James Buchanan, William Brooks, Ezra Ross, and Bathsheba Spooner for the murder of Mr. Joshua Spooner. If you want to read it, go ahead. It's about 12 pages long. It took me 2 hours to deliver it, but that was not uncommon. The 3 men were there. Bathsheba wasn't because she was still feeling the effects of the rough second examination, so she didn't attend. So it was a solemn and final farewell, is the way it was described. But it was in those days, I mean, this was a source of entertainment. Public executions, they were a big deal. It took place, as best as I can figure, somewhere down by Washington Square in Worcester. There's a big, if you get rid of everything, it's a big flat area that would accommodate about 5,000 people, which is how many came to but it was a carnival-like atmosphere. And Isaiah Thomas, who founded the Worcester Spy, Massachusetts Spy, he had morning poems done up, he wrote, and they were selling those. And they had the declaration that the 3 prisoners, the 3 men, put together. He was selling those. So it was a carnival-like. They marched them from the jail, which again, someplace around what's now Lincoln Square, probably down Summer Street to what's now Washington Square, which is actually round. That's right. Anyway, and they were executed there. But as they were preparing to execute them, there was a huge thunderstorm that came up, and they were executed during the thunderstorm. Bathsheba had asked for an autopsy, and when she was dead, someone did an autopsy. I like to think it was John Green, her brother-in-law, the physician, and it was found she was carrying a 5-month-old male infant. Fully formed, everything was fine. So, because her dead husband was buried in Brookfield, her sisters didn't think, and one sister lived in Brookfield, one sister lived in Worcester, John Green's wife, didn't think it was a good idea to bury her in Brookfield. So Mary Green, on the Green estate, she said, bury them, the baby and Bathsheba, up at our estate. So they did. And the grave was marked. I've actually seen a picture of it that I cannot find again. I thought I saved it on my computer. I have no idea. But it was an area, I don't know, maybe 15 feet square, and it had a low stone wall around maybe 2 feet high, and a little stone arch. And when you look at it, you go, oh yeah, it's a little graveyard. That's just kind of what clicks in your head. Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote an article for the New York World, I think it was, in 1899, about women being executed. And she used Bathsheba as her example. And this was a full-page article, full-page piece. And that caused a great interest in Bathsheba's case. So people were coming to Worcester to see Bathsheba's grave. So they took it apart, took the walls down so no one knew where it was. And supposedly the last person who knew where Bathsheba was buried died in 1940, a secret with him. So nobody knows. Now, in 1905, the Green estate was gifted to the city of Worcester and is now Green Hill Park. So Bathsheba and an unborn child lie somewhere in the park, and no one knows where. The house was up on a far hill overlooking the pond. Golf courses, there's a pond right here. House was up here on a hill, golf courses all over here. And you don't know where, would they have buried her close to the house? Would they have buried her far away? You know, you don't know. So she's somewhere there in a lonely grave. Now, if you go to the Brookfield Cemetery, come through Route 9, go through West Brookfield, come up, and the cemetery's on the right-hand side. The granite wall is there, and there's a space, and there's two granite markers. One is tilted like this. Spooner's marker is right behind it, but it's a relatively recent monument, I guess, marker. And it says on it, Joshua Spooner, murdered March 1st, 1778 by 3 soldiers of the Revolution, Ross, Brooks, and Buchanan, who at the instigation of his wife Bathsheba, they were all executed at Worcester, July 2nd, 1778. That's his supposedly gravestone. It is much newer. What's really weird is it is next to her sister Martha family's stuff. So Spooner's is right here. Actually, her husband John Tufts, his first wife is buried there, then John, then Martha, and then her daughter Patsy, and then I don't remember who the son was. But so Spooner's marker is right there. I don't think that's where he's buried. I think that's just the marker that was put up. Because theirs is slate, it's all engraved, his is just this, which is not much at all. It's really kind of weird. But the kids ended up going to live with basically their cousin, John Spooner's son, John Spooner Jr., in Roxbury. Timothy Ruggles, he always came up smelling like a rose. He was given 10,000 acres of land in Nova Scotia for his service to the crown, and he established an estate that was as productive and as beautiful there as the one in Hardwick. His sons joined him. 2 of his sons, he had 3 sons. The youngest, Timothy Jr., lived in Hardwick and took care of his mother until she died in 1784, I guess it was. And then he just hightailed it to Nova Scotia. He actually became a prominent citizen. The mother died in 1784. She's buried in the Hardwick Cemetery. Well, again, there's a marker, and it says Bathsheba Ruggles, wife of General Timothy Ruggles. There's nothing about her, it's all him. Mary Green lived a long life. Her husband died, he served in the legislature. Martha Tufts, she lived till 1813, and she was the one who lived on Brookfield Common. It was actually, if you go down 148 south, just at the end of the common on the right-hand side, there's a colonial that's painted a kind of a brick red, shiny brick red. I think that's where she lived. The house was there at that time. And I know that she lived somewhere on the common, near the common. William Cushing, the Chief Justice, became Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. He was one of the first ones named by Washington. He gave Washington the oath of office at his second inauguration, so he was a big deal. Jedediah Foster, he died the following year. He died in October 1779. But he was one of three men who drafted the Massachusetts Constitution, which is still in effect, and it's the longest governing constitution in the world. The interesting thing is his daughter Abigail died in July of 1779. She was 23 years old. And there's a local legend about that Ruggles had something to do with her death as retribution for Foster sentencing his daughter to be hanged. And whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it's that local thing that keeps on growing, and I've heard it half a dozen times. It's like, make a great story. And Levi Lincoln, he went on to become the Attorney General of the United States under Thomas Jefferson. He served for 4 years. He came back. He was elected to the House of Representatives. He was a pretty big deal in those days. And that's the cast of characters. That's Bathsheba's story. Well, it's a lot more than that's what I'm telling you. That's it. So, thank you. Yes, sir.
What was Bathsheba's father doing during the trial? Was he trying to influence things?
Bathsheba's father was on Staten Island with the rest of the British. As a matter of fact, I've read a couple things saying that they tried to keep the news of what happened to Bathsheba away from him. I don't think he was successful, but he couldn't have done anything for her. Nothing. I mean, he had no influence at all anymore. He was an outcast, basically, as were all of the Loyalists. So yeah, he couldn't do anything.
Why did people come to see her grave? Why was it becoming an attractive nuisance?
I don't know. It was just one of those things. The article generated a lot of interest, and people wanted to see where Bathsheba was buried. And it was that the whole article was about she was the last woman hanged in Massachusetts, which isn't true, but that was the gist of the article. And this is why we have to stop this. And it just went. It was all Bathsheba, and you read it, and you kind of go, "Yeah, oh, what a great story." And people just came to
all Bathsheba as the hanged person, not Bathsheba as the person who talked 5 men in the murder.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yes, George.
So what are you working on now?
Funny you should ask that. I actually just finished a contemporary fiction novel. It actually is up to my readers. The manuscript is done. It's up to my readers. I should get that back in a few weeks and wrap that up. I'm going to try and find an agent for that book because I think it has potential. I've just started working on the sequel to that, which is a father-son road trip type of thing. However, I am going to have another historical fiction book that I'm going to do. Now, I'm 65, and I have people say, you ought to write a book about this, you ought to write a book about that. It's like, kids, there's only so much time left, so I have to pick these things carefully, because each one takes a couple years. But there's a woman I know in Brookfield. One of her ancestors was from North Brookfield, and he fought in the Civil War. He was in for 4 years. And he wrote a letter home every week. And they have all of those letters. Her sister put together in a book and has done all the research. It's just a fascinating story. So she asked me, would you consider writing a book about this? Now, one of the most difficult things in writing a historical fiction book is the research. It's already done. So I told her I won't. So that one's on the docket somewhere. So that's what I'm working. And then there's another one. In 1677, after King Philip's War, the village of Hatfield was attacked by a group of Indians, supposedly 30 Indians, who took 19 people, mostly women and children and a couple of guys, to Canada. And that was the first time captives had been taken to Canada. The husbands of two of the women, Stephen Jennings and his last name was Waite. Oh God, what was his first name? Anyway, out in Hatfield, they decided to go get their families. They went to Albany, where the commanding officer had them arrested and sent down to New York to meet with the governor. Governor von Bronx came from that, I guess, who sent them back, you know, what's wrong with this guy here? The military commander, Sylvester, got them a guide who brought them up to the foot of Lake George and drew them a map and left and said, here you go. Now, these are two men who've never been out here, and they ended up going up the western shore of Lake George and Lake Champlain in November, December of 1678. They ended up in Canada at the little village Chambly, where they saw Jennings' wife, who'd been traded for liquor. So she's pregnant. And so they find the rest of the captives up in the village of Sorel. They go up, meet with them, and they go to see Governor Frontenac, who arranges for their release. They had to spend the whole winter in Canada because they couldn't come back. Both babies were born in Canada. Waite's baby was named Canada Waite. And you can go to her grave there, her family's grave, right out in Hatfield, it's a little cemetery. So they came back, it took them 9 months, the men were gone 9 months, and they came back and it was the Great Rescue, which is a fascinating story. So that's on the docket too somewhere. And then I might just go to a Caribbean island and drink, drinks on the beach all day. I don't know. But that's it. That's right. Yes.
Is the Spooner family still a prominent family? Because I knew some Spooners in Cambridge.
I don't know if they are or not. Yes, there are plenty of Spooners around. There are a lot of Ruggles family members too. But again, when the Ruggles came to Hardwick, there were 6 families. I don't know how many people. But if you go out there now, there's Ruggles Road, Ruggles Hill, Ruggles this, Ruggles that. And half the descendants, half the people in town now are the descendants of those families, and they're all Ruggles. So you can't go anywhere without bumping into a Ruggles family. But I don't know about the Spooners, possible. Anyway, okay, well, thank you.